Hi, everyone. Welcome to Truth Matters with F.J. Thomason. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the two donkeys from Matthew 21. And the reason we're going to talk about the two donkeys from Matthew 21 is because for some strange reason, people are quite confused about these two donkeys in Matthew 21. So I'm going to read you a passage and see if you can tell me what Jesus was doing in this passage. And just from a basic normal reading, applying your common sense, tell me what you think happened in this passage. And so here's the passage. It comes from, again, Matthew 21. Now, when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, and this is, of course, from Zechariah 9:9, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. Most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Now, when you see this part about they brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them, some people think that that means he sat on the two donkeys. I think that is the most absurd reading I've ever heard. So does Tim McGrew. So does Michael Jones. So do anybody who reads this with a normal, who's had normal experiences. You don't ride on two donkeys. So to assume that you're riding on two donkeys, as apparently Bart, Ehrman, Derek Lambert, Paul Agia, and other atheists like the one I have pictured here, Kip Davis, have indicated, they think that the passage is about Matthew trying to fulfill purposely a little parallelism from Zechariah 9:9, meaning that there was the repetition of the word for the donkey. So there's a donkey on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. You've got a little parallelism. So he thinks that Matthew purposely is writing the passage to fit this prophecy, to fulfill the prophecy. You see, it's one of those things that the atheist in many cases has assumptions that the gospel authors are trying to fulfill prophecies, and Matthew tends to fulfill a lot of prophecies. He mentions quite a few prophecies in his gospel, and so they assume that the intention of the author is to fulfill prophecies. Now, I'm assuming that the intention of the author is to repeat the truth. I also believe that Matthew was the first to write the four gospels. I believe his gospel came first, and that's why the early church fathers placed it first in the New Testament. I think it's followed by Mark, then likely Luke, and then John. So that is the order it appears, and that's the order I think it was actually written in. And it's not a hill I'm going to die on, because I know there are some Christian scholars, even people like William Lane Craig, who seem to believe that Mark was written first. I just disagree with them. I think that the Catholics originally wrote these books. The Catholics put it together, and the Catholics put Matthew first. And so one of the reasons why I think some atheists like to place Mark first is because they think that Mark is a little less explicit than the others about Jesus' resurrection, especially with the contested final verses in the book of Mark, which I also think were in the original. That's also one of my more traditional thoughts. So what we're going to do today is I want to say howdy to Susan. So I'm going to listen to a little bit of this Kip Davis thing. Now, let me just show you what happened here. So we first start off with a video. There's some videos, but there's a video by Inspiring Philosophy or Michael Jones that talked about this passage, talked about how some people seem to think that Jesus rode two donkeys. And then it talks about what would be a normal understanding of that, which Tim McGrew also pointed out. The normal reading of that is that he perhaps them refers to the cloaks. Now, in the books Mark and Luke and John, there's mention of a donkey. They didn't mention the second donkey in those books. And so if you believe that Mark was written first and you think Matthew came second, then you think that Matthew added the donkey. I believe that Matthew could have been an eyewitness. I believe he was the tax collector, that Matthew. And I think that he would have seen the two donkeys. I think that Mark got his information from Peter. So maybe Peter had only shared with him about one donkey, or maybe he mentioned two, but he didn't think it was that important to even mention in the passage. You'll notice there's also variations on the number of angels who appeared at the empty tomb, the number of women who came to the empty tomb, depending on the gospel author's preferences. And then, of course, I also believe that John was an eyewitness. I believe that Luke was a friend of Paul's, traveled with Paul. And I think John was, of course, the beloved disciple of Jesus who wrote all of this stuff down. So let's listen to Kip. Now, Kip makes a couple of comments about inspiring philosophy that I really don't appreciate. He seems to think that inspiring philosophy is being a little too confident in his beliefs. I don't really have a problem with how Michael is pretty confident in some of his beliefs. I think that that's actually good in some of the things that he's talking about. I want to say hi to Slam in the chat here and Utopia Buster. And yes, I hear you. So we'll get that out there. So howdy to Slam. There we go. And then God bless all to Utopia Buster. Here we go. So the bottom line is they think that Jesus sat on two donkeys. I think that it's possible when he said sat on them, he sat on the cloaks. They put the cloaks on the donkeys. And then maybe he sat on a couple of cloaks. Of course, we're reading into the passage, assuming that there were just two cloaks. Maybe there were some more cloaks. You really don't know. It said put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. Maybe it's one cloak per donkey. Could be. But he sat on one donkey and rode one donkey in, just as has always been conveyed. To think that he rode on two donkeys, to me, seems like such a stretch. And it's actually kind of sad, to be honest. It's actually kind of sad. So here, we're going to go back to this right here and comment on what we hear.
The two animals, but such reference is by no means necessary. Matthew is not careful to distinguish, but common sense can do it. Let's not be stupid. Enough.
So I agree. That was Tim McGrew right there, and says, yes, common sense. If we want to just go with basic common sense, we can see that he rode on one donkey. It almost seems like too silly of an issue to even discuss, but for some reason, they're really hanging on to this thing, that he was purposely trying to fulfill the passage, that because it was a mention of it later on in the other passages rather than them, that Matthew just added that in because he was purposely trying to fulfill Zechariah 9:9. I don't believe any of that. I believe Matthew was just conveying the information. So let's go here.
Just want to point out here, A.T. Robinson died in, was it 1937?
Apparently, according to Kip, you're not allowed to read anything that a scholar said if he's pre-World War II. But of course, that is the exception to that, or Doderlein, who had some mangled idea about the book of Daniel, and of course, Wellhausen, who has a mangled idea, JEPD theory. And so he's of course, discounting those two who were around way before this particular scholar in 1937. But I digress.
Virtually everything he wrote was pre-Second World War.
So that is supposed to be something that we should discount, apparently, according to Davis.
And I mean, my impression is that in particular, not Michael Jones, but in particular, guys like Tim McGrew, like Lydia McGrew, like Jonathan McClatchy, like my friend Eric Manning from the channel Testify, when it comes to the scholarship that they deal with, they love just sitting there in the pre-war scholarly discussion.
And that actually is a complete misrepresentation of all of the people that he named. I've heard all of them speak of current scholars. I've heard them also engaging current scholars. I've heard them talking to current scholars, going on channels of current scholars. There's, talking about people like, say, William Lane Craig and his position on things. And so I don't even see a reason to think some of this stuff. And so that's just kind of an issue that I've seen. And other ones, like, it just seems silly. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to go ahead here a little bit to get to the comment on Michael. So
read the text before. So yeah, it's verse 7, and they lay the garments on them, and they said, yeah, okay. So all right. So it's actually pretty clear because it says, it uses the same Greek words. they spread them upon them, and then it says, and he sat upon them.
So to me, any common sense reading of that, if you guys take a look at that, the common sense reading is he spread the cloaks down on top of the donkeys, and then he sat on a cloak. Okay, and so he sat on it. It's not really something that should even have an issue.
Which of them is he talking about? Well, okay, you tell me. but grammatically. So let me just say, I didn't make this up. It's not like this is my stupid reading. The person who actually convinced me of this reading is John Meyer, who's Tim won't like this, but he's a Roman Catholic scholar who wrote one of the really very best commentaries on the Gospel of Matthew. And he was a very committed Christian and a very devout Roman Catholic.
Sorry,
but he used this passage to say that in his judgment, Matthew was probably not Jewish, because Matthew's taking this synonymous parallelism from Zechariah and doesn't seem to realize that it's synonymous parallelism, and so he has two animals. And the way the synonymous parallelism works in Zechariah is that you state one line. This is how it happens in all the poetry in the Old Testament. You state a line, and then the second line says the same thing in other words. And so it's kind of reinforcing it. But Matthew's obviously taking it in some kind of literal way. So I'm not saying that Matthew is stupid, although Tim's saying I'm stupid, but that's okay. I'm not saying that Matthew is stupid. What I am saying that he's taking this image literally in a way that doesn't really make any sense to show that Jesus literally fulfilled it. And that's John Meyer's argument. It's kind of an art. A common argument. I think it's kind of maybe it's meant to be humorous. I don't know, but he does sit on them. So I don't know.
Okay, so here is the problem before we go on. It really seems like Dr. Ehrman is just woefully ignorant of the scholarship around this problem. There's a lot more than the one guy he cites on this, and it just seems like, according to his own admission, Dr. Ehrman heard this argument from this Catholic scholar, said, well, that seems likely, and then didn't explore any of the other scholarship around this. And that's important because in my video he's responding to, which I don't even know he watched the whole thing when he was on Paul Gia's channel. Seems like he just watched parts of it. I addressed a lot of his very concerns. So, here's another interesting paper by Stephen Carlson. Stephen Carlson actually wrote a 2-part paper on this very issue.
So let's read what that says. Proponents of the double donkey reading differ as to the aptness of, I can't really see this screen. Let me just make this bigger so I can see it better. Hold on just a second here. There we go. Okay, I guess I can't get it too much bigger than that. Shoot. Proponents of the double donkey reading differ as to the aptness of the reading for Matthew, because it relates to the ethnicity or education of the evangelist. On the one hand, some dub the reading a simple misunderstanding on the part of Matthew, a mistake so blatant that the author of Matthew must have been a Gentile. This view has fared rather poorly in recent years, however, and is criticized for failing to account for Matthew's general competence on Jewish matters. So it's saying that Matthew wouldn't be aware of the parallelism from the Hebrews. I think that seems like a pretty silly idea. I think, of course, Matthew was Jewish, and I think he certainly would be aware of it. As a tax collector, he probably would be really intelligent, reasonably intelligent, definitely would have decent reading skills and all of that kind of stuff. And so they go into a little bit on that, and then they start talking about whether or not Matthew was reading from the Septuagint or if he's reading the Hebrew. I also think that seems something not worth arguing about, because who's to say it was either one or the other, and it couldn't have been both? Is there a chance that someone could actually be quoting sometimes from the Septuagint and other times from the Hebrew? I mean, there's certainly a possibility. And so there's no reason why we have to lock people in to one belief or another. And so let's listen to what Kip has to say in response to this.
Stephen Carlson's papers on the issue are pretty good. I would say that if there is a way to sort out this problem in such a way that the image provided within the Gospel of Matthew doesn't look ridiculous, as Tim suggested. Carlson's probably got the best track on this. I'm not sure that I agree with everything that he says in there, and I'll get to some of this as well. Sorry, just pulling it back a bit. Sorry. All right. So, but we'll get to that.
One of the things he notes is proponents of the double donkey reading, like Dr. Ehrman, differ as to the aptness of the reading of Matthew because it relates to the ethnically or education of the evangelist. On the one hand, some dub this reading as simple misunderstanding on the part of Matthew, a mistake so blatant that the author of Matthew must have been a Gentile. Here's the important part. Carlson then says, this view is fared rather poorly in recent times, however, and is criticized for failing to account for Matthew's general competence of Jewish matters.
So I just want to stop there and point out what Carlson is getting at, what specifically he is, saying with regards to this view. This view is the idea that Matthew, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, the Matthean evangelist, was ethnically not Jewish, that he was probably he was probably Roman, and he did not know and did not understand the Hebrew Bible.
One of the problems with atheist scholarship, and I've seen this even admitted in some of the scholarship, like by Ulrich Borges, is first they have the notion that there can't be fulfilled prophecies because the Bible isn't theologically derived. It's not derived from God. They think that it was derived from man. And so then whenever they see prophecies, they decide that the prophecies must have been written after. And based on this assumption that there aren't any fulfilled prophecies in the Gospels, there's no fulfilled prophecies that we see throughout the Old Testament. We've got Isaiah, of course, making specific mention of King Cyrus, for example, in the book of Isaiah. And King Cyrus came around a couple hundred years after him. So we have in the year 539 or so BC, we have King Cyrus showing up on the scene, and that was predicted by Isaiah and mentioned by Isaiah in the 8th century BC. So we have that kind of thing. And so people started to make all kinds of, they came up with these notions that obviously that part of Isaiah was redacted or added in. And so all of the books of Isaiah, any copies of Isaiah that had been all around the ancient Near East, they must have rounded up all of them and added in the name King Cyrus. Right. Right. So you see how ridiculous that is? They also have posited that the book of Daniel, they notice in the book of Daniel that it contains a reference that sounds pretty explicitly to refer to Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes reigned a long time ago, but right around 165 BC. And Daniel, who self-identified in the book of Daniel, was written in the 6th century BC. And the fact that Daniel mentions 4 kingdoms, he mentions by name that the Medo-Persian kingdom, then he mentions by name the Greek kingdom, which didn't come around until well after Daniel was living. And then he mentions the final 4th kingdom, and out of which Jesus would come, essentially, out of which the Messiah would come. So if you want to go take a reference to that, you can see it in Daniel 9:24-27, I believe, where we have a pretty specific reference to Jesus, and that the anointed one was going to be cut off. And so all of this stuff did occur, and it was prophesied by Daniel. And so the people who don't like the fact that Daniel made such a specific reference to this very evil king who appeared in the Greek kingdom, King Antiochus Epiphanes, because he made mention of him. They think that Daniel must have been written by some other guy after King Antiochus Epiphanes reigned, and that he somehow duped the early Jews into thinking that this is a 6th century BC book. You see, of course, they are blinded by their silly beliefs that there's no prophecies possible. And the same thing extends to Matthew. Now, Matthew, what he did when he was writing is he realized that a lot of the stuff that was happening was fulfilling Jewish scriptures. He was a Jew. He would have known Jewish scriptures probably pretty decently. and he was able to recognize so many fulfillments by Jesus. Of course, many scriptures were fulfilled, and Matthew makes a big point of that because he was really writing to the Jews. He was a Jew himself, and he was writing to show them all of the references that Jesus fulfilled. He fulfilled many things. And one of my favorites, of course, is Isaiah 53. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was cut for our iniquities. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was killed for our iniquities. And so that's a beautiful passage that refers to Jesus' crucifixion. In fact, the piercing for our transgressions is also mentioned in his hands and feet being pierced in Psalm 22, and then Zechariah 12:10, the firstborn, and how he was cut off. And so we see those references in the Old Testament that were fulfilled very well in the New Testament. What's interesting, of course, is the means of persecution, the crucifixion, wasn't even invented during the time when Isaiah wrote his thing, because it was invented much later by the Persians and of course, perfected by the Romans as a means of the most horrific means of killing somebody that's possible. So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that a lot of these guys are basing what they think about the New Testament on their own assumptions, but they're not critically examining their own assumptions. Kip's assumption is that Matthew, definitely he doesn't think that Matthew probably was the tax collector, doesn't think he personally knew Jesus, was an eyewitness to the accounts, probably doesn't think a lot of things like that. And some people think that some anonymous people authored the four Gospels. Now, Inspiring Philosophy's made some pretty good videos that refute that idea. And you can go back to the very early times, and we have specific mentions of the authors in the 2nd century and by people like Irenaeus. And so we've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're named and no one else is named. And so they don't have other people writing these. And John has always traditionally been the one who's authored the 4th gospel, and that is the beloved disciple. And we have little pieces of evidence inside the Gospels that they were authored by the people that are referenced. Like, for example, in the book of Matthew, we've got a specific mention of the drachma tax, which, of course, a tax collector would be pretty interested in. And then in John, we have a pretty unique reference to the 153 fish, something that a fisherman would like to report, the specific count of the fish. And so anyway, so the idea that Kip has here is that it's not written, it's not reliable, that Matthew either didn't know what he was doing or something to that effect, and it really doesn't make much sense. And so I think that it's important that we know that. So I want to say hi to everyone. Yeah, see, this is the typical thing. And first they'll say it, like Wellhausen spotted the fact that there's a lot of fulfilled stuff coming out of the Pentateuch. He noticed a lot of the things, like, for example, that the Jewish people were going to be captured, and what's the word I'm looking for? How they were captured by the Assyrians. Some of them were taken away by the Assyrians, and another part of them was captured. What's the word I'm looking for? It's captured under King Nebuchadnezzar, of course, in the 6th century. In the book of Daniel, we've got that mentioned. So yeah, that's an assumption that Isaiah was written over all those years. It's not taking into account the fact that there were very likely multiple copies of these Old Testament scrolls all throughout the ancient Near East. If you have some very valuable scrolls, it seems likely that you would make multiple copies of that. And that's evidenced even in the Qumran, even when we had going to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which that's apparently his specialization, is the Dead Sea Scrolls. But we have multiple copies of the scrolls there. And so why would we not expect that the community, the Hebrew community that had so treasured and valued the scriptures, wouldn't have multiple copies? And so this idea that there's just one copy and people are adding stuff to it over centuries seems to me ludicrous. And I don't know what you guys think about that, but it just seems ludicrous. Otangelo, you want to come on here? Want to join me? You came on one time and you weren't able to get in. So I'm gonna put a little invite here into the I'm going to put a little invite here in case you'd like to come on and chat. Oh, did that go out? Oh, wait, there it is. Okay, good. Yeah, so Otangelo is going to come in here. He tried to come in here a little while ago. I had a couple of other people on. I had Steve and Derek of Myth Vision on, And Derek's another one who also endorses the two donkey theory. And I just think it's so ludicrous. So here you go, Otangelo. In fact, let me just get this off the stage here. To Kip off the stage, put Otangelo on the stage. How are you, Otangelo?
Yes, I'm fine, thanks. And you, SJ?
I'm doing well. Yeah. So did you see this little two donkey controversy going on with these guys?
No, I just finished an over an hour long stream on Islam in German channel. And it was very interesting. In the end, they were saying that I was lying, and I don't accept that, and I just left the stream. But it was quite interesting. They were claiming. I always, when I'm talking to Muslims, I always talk about the central event of the New Testament, which is the crucifixion and the resurrection, which they deny. And the whole discussion was, if you are in, I'm sorry if I interrupt the team, that just 2 minutes, I'll just.
No, it's good. This is interesting.
Yeah, the main topic was that if you are a judge and you have on the one side a group of, let's say, 50 people which testify about an event that they all together saw, and they do not deny that the event actually happened, but there can be some small discrepancies in the description of the details of what happened. And on the other side, you have maybe someone which didn't present the event, but makes the opposite claim of the group of people. And you as a judge, you need to decide which of the two opposing views is the correct one. Obviously, if you have a group of 50 people which all together claim that the event happened, then you, as a judge, you will go with the eyewitness people, even if they have some small differences in their account. That's normal. You don't usually, after 10 or 20 years, eventually remember exactly the details of everything that happened. You will not go with the other person which didn't present the event and claiming that it didn't happen. And I put that in regards of the New Testament on all the authors which claim, and all together without any contradiction, say Jesus was crucified and resurrected. And the Quran has just one author, which supposedly was Muhammad, which after 600 years makes the claim that Jesus wasn't crucified and didn't resurrect. Obviously, as a judge, I go with the group of people which are eyewitnesses, even if there are some details which do not match 100%. So in the end, they said that I was not serious, not sincere, because 1 Timothy 3:16 says that the whole scriptures, all the New Testament was inspired by God. But if there are contradictions, then did the Holy Spirit inspire the authors to give different and contradicting accounts? So that was the point that they tried to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. They have a really vague passage in the Quran that seems to imply that God took Jesus into his hands before that Jesus was crucified. And so a lot of Muslims think that maybe some other guy was was crucified in his place, or they'll just deny the whole thing altogether. And so I think it's ridiculous because, like you said, they could go back to Tacitus, who said that he paid the ultimate price. That was a Roman historian during the time. We had Josephus also writing during the time. He is a Jewish historian. It's recorded in the Talmud. It's recorded by many, many, many others that he was crucified. So I think denying they can deny the divinity if they want. That's really what they do as part of their religion. But denying the crucifixion occurred as a historical event.
Exactly. So they wanted to know, how do you make the differentiation between which of the two holy books is true? I obviously wanted to get to the Shroud of Turin because that is my evidence that the resurrection and the crucifixion happened. But they knew it because they saw me in other streams. So they didn't want me to get to that point. So the whole thing was, which of the two, why should the Quran be the last revelation of God? And I said, well, first of all, because it contradicts my faith. I'm a Christian. I believe in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Your book denies it. So why should I believe it? And then they tried to argue that there are contradictions in the accounts of the Gospels and so forth. And I said, well, eyewitness accounts, if they are all telling exactly the same thing, then we know that they copy it from each other.
I don't find those I don't find the contradictions to be valid, because every time they've said it, like I've put together the birth narratives by simply reading Luke first and Matthew second and realizing that Luke is over a period of a couple of years. And that's why Herod waited to, that's why he murdered all the kids under 2. He picked that year because that was the span of time, possible span of time. And I also think that I think that the 4 accounts of the empty tomb, I think they fit together. And the only way they wouldn't fit together is if people pack assumptions into the writings that aren't there. And so, because I put it together and it all fit like a glove. So I don't see the problems. I do see a problem with Muslim beliefs, because it said Galatians 1:8, let them be accursed. If they're going to come up with some new gospel, that also applies to the Latter-day Saints.
Absolutely, yes. That's why my discussion with Muslims is always about the central point. Either Jesus is who he said to be, either he is the Savior, the Messiah, the one who came to pay for our sins, or he is not. That's the central issue. And that's why I always come to this point. And they always fail because they have just blind faith. In another opportunity, I said, what evidence do you have that what in the Quran is said that Jesus was crucified is true? Obviously, they have no evidence. And they say, well, I trust that the Quran is God's revelation. I said, well, then you have blind faith. That's nothing else than blind faith. You have no evidence.
It's interesting. See, I won't even, I really don't, I have Muslim friends at work. It's funny because I have friends from all these different faiths, and I wonder if God just puts me in a place to have friends from all these different faiths. And they're very, we just don't talk religion. Like I don't talk religion with them. I think it's actually kind of brave of you to go onto a Muslim's channel, because I like knowing that they're never going to change. If they leave their faith, in many cases, they might end up being killed. And so it's very dangerous for them to leave their faith. And I've heard that there's like secret societies in these parts of the world that are Christian. They're, but they don't want to admit that, say, they left the Muslim faith and went to Christianity, because if they do, their families might also disown them, just as Jesus predicted.
Yes. I mean, there is a lot of persecution. I have a lot of Pakistani friends, and very recently, many houses and churches were burned. So this is a reality. They really have a real price to pay to defend what they believe.
Yeah, I think that's another thing. Now, are you coming from Brazil? Is that where you are now?
Yes, I live in Brazil, but I'm not Brazilian. I'm Swiss Italian.
Yeah, well, I'm just asking that because I'm just thinking, from the places we are in the world, how safe do you feel it is to be I feel it's pretty safe to be a Christian here in the United States, although that might go away one day. I think it's getting less and less safe over in Europe to be a Christian.
Yeah, I think we can consider ourselves privileged to be living in countries where there is no persecution and no dispute between other religious beliefs and ours. So we are blessed with that. But I don't know if in the forthcoming future this will change. But I think so far the Christian faith is very well eradicated in South and North America. So I think that the situation like in Pakistan or elsewhere, in Europe, we see many Muslim immigrants coming to Europe. And there are some neighborhoods in the UK, which I've heard about, where you are at risk as a Christian to visit these neighborhoods. But this is certainly an exception. I think Europe is not that far to become Muslim generally.
Yeah, I found out that I have because my grandmother was of German heritage. She was considered a German citizen, and they took that away from her when she married an American. I found out that I have the opportunity, if I learn basic German language, that I can apply for citizenship under some law that apparently is in effect, I think, until around 2030. So, and I'm thinking I'm going to do that because I think we need to go over to Europe and spread the good news a little bit.
Well, when I converted, I was 18. I was living in Zurich, Switzerland. And basically, at the first moment of my conversion, my focus was always evangelism. And the church that I went was very active, and every weekend on Saturdays we united together. Then we had about half an hour of praying, and then we went to the street, and there we preached the Gospels and delivered gospel tracts and so forth. And then we invited people to come to our church and drink a tea, a coffee, and talk about Jesus and the faith and so forth. And that was a wonderful time. And what I've seen is it was very, very rare. If you put the effort that we put every weekend to go to the streets and to the number of people which actually received Christ as Lord and Savior, it was just a very small number. So I'd say that Europe is very hard on it for the gospel, and those which claim to be Christians, they are just Christians by name. They maybe go once or in a while to the church, but practicing really Christianity, that is rare. I would say maybe less than 1%.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's actually, there's a lot of, and they talk about intrinsic religiosity and extrinsic religiosity. And it's kind of like the intrinsic means you believe, like I would believe in Christianity based on my personal relationship with Jesus, a relationship with God, the internal stuff. And then there's some people who might just sort of use the church for its social benefits or something like that. And so that's more extrinsic. And the intrinsic leads to all kinds of really good health outcomes and other things, but the extrinsic, not so much. And I think if there's a lot of extrinsic believers over there in Europe, that's why they're leaving the churches and converting those churches over to gymnasiums and everything else.
Yeah. I mean, here in Brazil, it's quite the opposite, I would say. But it is also, I'd say maybe, when the church grows a lot, then many negative things come also into play. Mm-hmm. And when I converted, I made a clear distinction. I was raised Catholic, and when I converted, I saw a very clear distinction between Protestants and and Catholics. And I had kind of a black-white perception. And today I see it quite differently. I am much more open, let's as brothers in Christ, despite that we have doctrinal differences and so forth. But I have met very, very fine Catholics which love the Lord, which have a great Christian life. And I've seen so many evangelicals which have brought so much harm and shame to the name of the Lord. So I think this perception of black and white, for me at least, it has vanished.
Yeah. I don't know if you know, but I've reverted to my Catholicism. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah,
so
I mean, for
you
me,
got a Catholic,
the fact
right?
that there are many evangelicals which do not live the Christian life doesn't mean for me to go back to Catholicism.
Oh, that's not why. Yeah, that's not why. But I definitely think we should, like, I kind of like the C.S. Lewis view is we should always be reaching across the aisles, and we really shouldn't be, like, I try to avoid too much controversy saying anything about the other side, because I saw what happened I actually went back and looked at the history of my grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, and the ones who lived in Ireland. They were all Catholic from my side. And so they were having a pretty horrible time. It was like during, what happened with right around the time of the potato famine, and it wasn't a good deal. And so I think if we can avoid any of that kind of distinction, the Catholic Protestant thing, that's not so good.
Yeah. I think the shroud is, for me, a great thing as well, because this distinction is completely eradicated, because none of the disputes come into play. There really the issue is about Christ and the historical evidence and so forth. And that's something that we can share between both sides. And it brings us actually together. And I think we should focus on what brings us together, not what separates us.
I totally agree. And speaking of what brings us together, you and I both have made videos, and you had a really good video that somehow went viral on the Shroud of Turin. Did you want to share with people if you have any new thoughts on that? Or because I know you wrote a book about it and you were talking about that before. You want to share with people sort of what that's all about?
Yeah, I actually made an image of the man on the shroud, and I think I came pretty close to that, and I animated it in that video, and I got more than 500,000 views. It's a 1 hour long
Wow.
video, and well, since I got these kind of criticisms, then I made a second video which extended to 2 hours, and I removed the part at the end with Jesus talking, and the parts which got criticism. That one has about 15,000 views now. It didn't go viral, and in parallel, I wrote actually 2 books. One is just about the historicity of Jesus, which is a 2-volume book with over 900 pages. And recently I published a second one exclusively about the Shroud of Turin. It has over 500 pages, quite extensive work. And there I go into all aspects related to the Shroud. So anyone of the audience which is interested, just search for my name on Amazon and you will find my books.
Yeah, so your name's your real name, Otangelo. So we can
Yes,
look up
that's my real name.
Otangelo Grasso, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you guys look for his books, and that sounds great. I liked your video. I was one of the 500,000 who watched your video. So I thought it was really good. You put it together in a very logical way. And so I think if people, that was the funny thing, Otangelo, what happened to me is how I even started believing that the Shroud happened and all this stuff was I happened to be watching this video. I think it was on the Non Sequitur show, but it was definitely with Steve McRae. And he had some guy on talking about the Shroud. And I think Steve brought him in thinking that the guy was going to say the Shroud was a fraud. And instead, the guy was pointing out all the facts about the Shroud that made it sound like it wasn't a fraud. And I thought, wait a second, I thought this was written off in the 80s. And so I went back and I looked up academic articles on it and realized that it's very active right now in the research. There's tons of people writing about it and investigating it in all kinds of different scientific ways. And there are reasons why we had that issue coming from 1988. But I think if you guys honestly look at the evidence now, I think you'll come to the decision that's Jesus on there.
Yeah, I think that the scientific work has basically been done, SJ. And anyone that still claims that it is a fraud has not looked into the scientific evidence, because it is a very, very robust case from Joe Marino. He says there are over 100 different scientific faculties that have been involved in investigating the Shroud from all kinds of different aspects, and they have not been able to show that a forger in the Middle Ages could have forged that image. And David Wolf has renewed his challenge of who can show how the image was made as a forger can win $1 million. So if you think it is a fraud, show how it was made and you will be rich.
The other thing is that I think is fascinating, and I think it would kind of debunk so many people's theories, is the way that we have the image on the Shroud is because we see the negative. Like someone took a picture of the Shroud and we see how that looks from a negative perspective. And so creating that image way back in the Middle Ages, and then you can take a picture of it today. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it is fascinating because if you see the real colors, you can only start to see a human figure if you stay about 6 feet away from the Shroud, from the image. So why would an artist in the Middle Ages make an image which can barely be seen? That would make no sense. And then when Secondo Pia made the first photograph in 1898, it was a big surprise that photo negative came out, and he was accused actually not by the scientists but by the Catholic Church, by the priest, that he was forging somehow that image and that it wasn't really a photo negative. And then in 1931, when Henry made a more advanced photograph, obviously it was the same image, but with much more detail. And Secondo Pio was still alive, so he was basically confirmed and had confirmed what he did in 1898. And even more amazing is the 3D information, so the distance information on the Shroud, which is absolutely impossible. That even today, with all the technology that we have, we cannot reproduce the image on the Shroud.
Yeah, very good stuff. I have somebody here called Nate who's in here in the waiting room, and I don't know Nate, so I was just kind of hesitant of putting him in here, but because I didn't really intend to have it open, but I could bring you in here, Nate, to introduce yourself if you like. I don't know if
Check if he has the camera on.
he had it on. Now it's off again. There it is. Yeah, I want the camera on just because I saw somebody do something kind of nasty on somebody else's channel once.
Happened to me too. Yeah.
So Nate, hi, did you want to introduce yourself?
I think he's froze.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Yeah,
I have about 20 more minutes I can go on here because I've got a call I've got to do at 5:45 my time. So I just in case, but I'm just to mention to everybody here, I'm going to do this every Wednesday at 4:30. I'm making a point to try to stick with one time and keep trying to run it. And I'll do open discussions sometimes and like that.
Yeah, and I have also a book out about evolution.
I read that one. Remember?
I did send it to you.
Yeah. Didn't I bring you on my channel about that? I think I did.
I think we were appointed to talk about the shroud, and then we changed our topic to evolution.
Yeah.
I think
I started this today talking about the two donkeys. Do you think it's silly to think that Jesus rode on two donkeys into town?
Well, I think it was just one.
Yeah, exactly. You don't ride on two. Who's going to sit on two donkeys? Like, how does that work? It's the silliest thing. Yeah. I think a straight reading leads you to think he sat on one donkey. And so we've just cleared that up, everybody. And so I see Nate is back, but his screen it doesn't look like he's able to get anything working there with his screen.
Yeah.
So Tangelo, what else have you been watching lately as far as, have you been following any of the, like, I know that I think you used to call the atheist experience and do things like that. Which atheist, do you interact still with a lot of atheists, or have you kind of, because I started off this channel talking with, I had I mentioned Bart Ehrman, Derek Lambert, and Kip Davis. And so just wondering if you interact with any of them.
Well, I have interacted almost with all the YouTube atheist show hosts. And well, I am more focused now on my book writing. Mm-hmm. I think, I mean, if you have talked to some of the hosts 3, 4, 5 times, and I've done that in the time span of about 2 or 3 years, and it becomes kind of repetitive. So, mm-hmm. And I mean, who do you know, SJ, of all these hosts, some even for 20 years now doing these shows, that has become convinced that our worldview is true? I don't know of any of them. Yeah. So the question is, either our worldview has really no good arguments and evidence, or they are just dogmatic atheists and close-minded, and they will not admit that we are right at any circumstances. And I am going with that second proposition. I think that they are dogmatic. They do not want to have God in their lives. So whatever argument or evidence that we will bring, they will simply deny it and say that's not enough evidence.
I was listening to a video by Inspiring Philosophy on biases, and it's like asking who has biases, and he's basically saying the research says everybody has biases. We just have to face it. What are our biases? I mean, I had a godless granny on my channel last week, and I said something like, I assume the Bible to be true. Like, and that is a bias of mine. I assume that the Gospels are the true story of Jesus Christ, and they were written by a couple of eyewitnesses and friends of eyewitnesses. And I believe in that. Yes, that does form a foundation. And then I start a lot of what comes after that is building upon that foundation. And so if they assume that the Gospels are written by men and they're faulty, that's their foundation. And so
I had several interactions with Godless Granny, even very recently on X, on Twitter, in private exchange. And she said, if you can prove to me that Jesus resurrected, if he gives me empirical proof that he did resurrect, then I will become a believer again. And this is something also which I often see by atheists. They put the burden of proof and the standard so high, and they probably know that it will never be met. And God, he will not do what Jesus Christ did. He already came and he was crucified. And he did the wonders, the miracles that only God can do. He did rise deaths from the tomb like Lazarus. He did heal blind people, and he did many different miracles, and they crucified him. They didn't believe that he was who he said to be. And that would be again today if he would come to our times. So I mean, this is something of the two basic things which I think are the problem of atheists. One is an epistemological framework which is not rational, which is not sound. Many still ask for proofs that God exists. And the second is a lack of scientific understanding. Because if you have a solid epistemological foundation, then you will seek not for proofs, but for the best evidence. Where does the evidence lead? And if you have good scientific understanding in astronomy, in physics, in biochemistry and biology, all these scientific faculties, they point clearly to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I like, I'm just going to repeat what first I saw here. It says from our friend here. Wait, no, I can't get it to come back up. Hold on, there it is. Malcolm Layton, it says, God did not put the gospel writers into a trance using automatic writing. Straw man alert, God used the spirit-inspired memories through eyewitness accounts. The gospels are perfect in that regard. Totally agree.
I said exactly this. I don't think that God dictated with the Holy Spirit each single word and they wrote it down in the Gospels. And God, he did respect the personalities of each writer. And so Paul has a writing style, Peter has a writing style, Luke, John, and so forth. They each had their personalities and God respected that. Mm-hmm. And maybe one saw an event from a perspective and focused more on one thing. The other saw the same event but described it from a different angle. And maybe there seem to be contradictions, but if you do some Bible study, you will see there are none.
Yeah, agreed. And so Utopia Buster this is the person I was going to get this quote, but this is so true. Thomas Nagel, I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. And Richard Dawkins said something like that too. He said something like, it would be very unpleasant if God existed for him.
I mean, if you see most of these atheist YouTube hosts, they have already confessed, if God exists, I will not change my position because God admitted slavery and he brought Noah's flood. Like Godless Granny, she says that she became an atheist because Aaron Ra brought some discourse of Noah's flood and how evil God was that he brought that. So we see clearly it is not just and exclusively about evidence. It is also about if people are inclined to like the God character in the Bible or not, and many don't.
I think I want to say slam that Susan. She says, actually, it's science which convinced me the truth of the scriptures, and a miracle was just icing on the cake. She had a miracle in her life. Like she was literally, when you go to hospice, you're pretty much done. Like you're about to die. That's the last place you go. And she was on a hospice bed. And then she had this strong feeling that Jesus was going to kind of breathe another life into her. And the next thing you know, here she is. And that was many years ago.
I mean, there are so many testimonies, and not only from Christians, but also from the other side, from Satanists, for example. I've seen recently one of a lady who said that she made a ceremony, a witch ceremony or something like that, and she didn't expect something to happen, but she went to another reality and she met the devil. And she described in all details the devil and so forth. And after I saw that, I thought to myself, why would somebody invent such stories?
Yeah,
and we are not talking about just one single person, but if you make a search on YouTube, you find many testimonies of people who went to NDE, went to hell, went to heaven, saw Jesus, saw the devil, and so forth. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of people also in other regions of the world, even in regions where Islam is predominant, people who died and saw Jesus. So the question is, are they all lying? Are they all nuts? Are they just all on drugs? Or is there something real on what they're telling us?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I listen to some Satanists too, in which I've listened to some videos like that and some NDE videos. And I have to say that the other thing I listen to is, do you ever listen to those exorcists? Like who
Well, rarely, but yes, I've seen some things.
because they've got some story. Like there was this one guy who was on Michael Knowles' channel, and it was named Dan Rehill, and his story was like, holy cow! Like this little old lady was possessed, and she literally was walking up a wall. Like there's some crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my wife, her family is all evangelical, like I am. But the grandfather of my wife, he was a spiritualist. Here in Brazil, it's called spiritismo or spiritism, and he had the ability to predict events, and they really happened. And he had counselors like governors who went to ask if they would gain the next election, and he was able to predict it. And all the predictions that he brought forward, they occurred, they happened. And very detailed descriptions, like saying this airplane will come down, will have an accident, and all people will die. And these events then happened. And it is very, very impressive. And the question, of course, is how can the spiritual negative, the devil world, the demon world have knowledge of future events? Something which I cannot explain, but it seems that they have.
I don't think, because from what I've heard from people like those exorcists that I listen to quite a few of them, actually. Chad Ripperger, I could go on and name a bunch of them. But the thing that they think is because the demons have like been around for thousands of years, that they're able to predict like what we'll do very well because they've been watching us for so many years. And so I think they can predict human activity quite well. I think that might be what a lot of it is.
Maybe they have some limited understanding of future events. I really don't know. But the thing is that why should someone simply discard all of these testimonies and say that's not true?
Yeah, I agree. I think, and Susan says, just ask 10 random people if they ever saw, knew of a miracle which happened to them or someone very close to them, and you'd probably have half of them say they knew of a miracle. Have you ever heard of them? I mean, have you had a miracle or known of a miracle, Otangelo?
Well, we have a close friend, which is a pastor, and he has the gift of prophecy. And I remember about 15 years ago, I'm a landlord. I buy big plots of land and I develop the land. And usually when I buy the land, then I ask him to come and give a blessing so that everything works well. And at that event, I asked him to go, and we went there, and there was a person which was taking care of the land. And when we arrived, he had never met that person before. And he said to that person, well, I know that 10 years ago you had an accident and your entire intestine was open and you almost died. All your blood went out, and you didn't die because God he did a miracle in that event, and you will come back to the Lord. He has a plan for your life. And the sister of that person was right on his side, and she made big eyes and said, well, that's true, you had that miracle and you almost died, and so forth. So whatever he said about this person, she immediately confirmed it. And that person was working in another state here in Brazil, and I know that about 2 weeks after that, he came back to the Lord. He was a believer. He then left the faith, and after this revelation, he came back to the Lord.
Wow.
So
I love those kind of stories. It's a beautiful story. And this
Yeah.
one here from Malcolm Layton, it says, my miracle was when I wanted to know if God was real and what I should do about it. If he was, Jesus showed up and didn't leave me. I think that's beautiful. Until she said, Malcolm said male, till he said yes. So let me say welcome to everybody in the chat, by the way. We do have a mix here, Otangelo. We've got some Christians and some non-Christians in here, like got Susan, who's a Christian. We got Slam RN, that's her. Captive Desk, Utopia Buster. Captive Desk, I think, is an atheist, and Iron Charioteer is also an atheist who's in here. I saw Blaster Master here and Utopia Buster 2017. So great to see everybody. Captive Desk say, I did all the stuff. Wait, what's he say here? I did all the stuff with occult thingies and no demons showed up and no UFO. So I hope you're not doing this stuff, because what if, I had Steve, let me tell you something. I had Steve McRae on my channel, and I almost want to take a clip of this particular thing that he said, but he's got all kinds of stories of like seeing shadows in his room and all this stuff. And he doesn't seem to think that those, like, I hear his stories and I'm like, that to me sounds like demons are in your room. It's just like,
yeah, but it seems that he is kind of blinded. I mean, he says that he's an agnostic. And I mean, it's strange that someone has a supernatural experiences, but nonetheless remains an unbeliever.
It really honestly doesn't make sense to me. So
Right.
yeah, I might find that in here. So anyway, Otangelo, what else? I have probably about 7 minutes or so, and then I'm going to have to jump off. Is there anything else we should chat about?
Well, maybe you can set up a stream where I can talk about any of my new books.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds really good. So wait, I want to say, I got a question here from Iron Charioteer about whether you believe. Now, I believe that Ouija boards can work with spirits. Yeah, I do believe that. Do you believe that?
Yes, I believe that too.
Yeah, I think they're pretty dangerous, to be honest. So I don't think you guys should be playing with those.
Yes, I am writing on a new book about the Christian worldview, and I hope that it will be a good tool for any apologist, because it will it will be about several different topics which I think are relevant to anyone which wants to defend its faith.
Good. So welcome, Nate. I haven't had you on here before. I've only got a couple minutes left, though. I've only got a few minutes, but welcome.
Thank you. Sorry about earlier. I tried to connect and then I hit a dead zone.
Yeah. Are you new to the channel? I don't know if I've seen you before.
I am Nathaniel Robinson. I think that you have banned my or silenced my account, but I'm unable to send messages, so you might not have seen me in a few months.
That is so, I wonder if my account silences people when I don't even know it's silencing people, because
or actually, a mod. Maybe a mod.
I will go and find that. If I did do that, I apologize, because I actually,
no problem.
Yeah, because I know I silenced Kip Davis not too long ago, and then he called me out on silencing him. So I decided to I went and found where all these people had been silenced, and I unsilenced everybody. So I shouldn't have anybody silenced at this point.
Oh, that's not what I was here for. I was just I apologize. I wasn't trying to bring that up. I was just answering the question.
Oh no, that's okay.
Hope you're doing well.
So yeah, no. So what's new with you? Where are you coming from? Are you in the States?
Yeah, I'm just in Dallas, and I've been listening probably for off and on for a few years now. I think that we have the common friend Ear Review.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I definitely remember. And I remember your account too, Nathaniel.
And I was just listening today, and at first just listening, but then when you guys started talking about the Shroud, I always like engaging with you all on that. So that's why I dialed in. But I'm not here to keep you, because I know that you said you had a couple minutes left. I don't want to tangle you up if you had engagements.
Well, I'm going to do this every Wednesday at 4:30, the same time. So, and I normally will not set myself up with another call right afterwards. That's my fault that I did that. I didn't know this was going to go longer. I didn't know I'd have guests on here. So it's welcome to all of you. It's really nice. Anything else you want to say? Either of you?
No. I'll try to be there next time and not hit that dead zone.
That sounds good. That sounds really good. Well, so Susan says she thinks I had a mod that silenced people, so I'm gonna have to go. I'm going to go find if I have a bunch of people. I had a huge number of people who were silenced, even ones that I like Harry Stark. Somebody silenced Harry Stark on my channel. And I'm like, Harry Stark is writing half the stuff I'm putting in here. So yeah, that one wasn't me for sure. Well, everybody, you guys, thank you. Please come back next week. I'm going to try to do this more regularly, definitely on Wednesdays at 4:30. But keep coming back. Just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So thank you for coming in here, everybody.
Have a good one. See you next time.
Thanks. So I'm going to end the stream.